So my name is Adrian Justice, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the security of emojis and looking into a bit of what happens when we put them in places they're not really intended to go. So hopefully everyone's had a few beers at lunch and is ready for some slightly less serious presentations. Before we start diving into what we can do with emojis, we should understand what they actually are and where they come from. So the idea of emojis sort of originally came around in like sort of the late 90s with just a basic symbol set created just to sort of represent things like what the current weather is and things like that. In 2007, Google started petitioning the Unicode consortium to get emojis sort of incorporated into Unicode so that they'll be sort of available for everything. And in 2010, that was actually accepted. All the updates after that were just sort of expanding Unicode, the emoji sort of character set out to include different colors for all of the emojis, different genders, different food, because they worked out there was no emoji for taco, but there was like 6 different types of sushi, and people got sick of that. I'm going to skip over how we encode emojis and stuff like that. I'll just leave it at its UTF-8 and 16 magic, because I was supposed to remove this slide and forgot about it. All right, so if we want to start playing with emojis in Windows, we're going to need to be able to type them. To do that, we've sort of got 2 basic options. Option 1, you can use a website like getomoji.com, search for what you want, copy and paste it into your text field. It works, but it's not a great option. Option 2 is we can use the built-in Windows emoji keyboard. If you push Windows key period or semicolon, it'll pop up the window down the bottom there, and then any emojis you click will be typed into your selected text field. So now that we can type emojis, let's have a play around with them in the most basic form of a Windows application, a terminal. According to the most trusted of sources, Stack Overflow, the Windows default console host, or con host, does not support Unicode, whereas the newer Windows terminal, which can be pulled down from the Windows App Store, does. So I put this to the test. Up the top, we've got Command Prompt and PowerShell, both running on top of con host, and both can't render emojis, instead displaying a little square with a question mark in it. Down the bottom, we've got the newer Windows terminal-based version of Command Prompt and PowerShell, and it's really hard to see up there, I'm now realizing, but the little colored bits are emojis, so just take my word for it. How about applications that output emojis? So on the screen now, we've got a small application I wrote that just outputs a random emoji, and surprise, surprise, the con-host-based ones still just output question marks, and the Windows terminal-based ones do successfully work. So we've covered a few bonus places you can shove emojis here. You can also obviously use them in file paths and file names. And just for the hell of it, I put it into the metadata for the file as well. So just editing the Visual Studio project, it quite happily did it. On to something a little bit more useful now. Can you make your Windows domain name contain emojis, or can you name your computer host with emojis? Absolutely. So up here, we've got a computer named Diamond DC Hazard Sign. So that's nice and easy. The full computer name, or we can see our domain, is Emoji Corp with some flames. The less obvious thing here is that the word Emoji Corp is actually written in emojis as well. There's not a whole lot of use for this, but I mean, I guess you can mess with someone a little bit. So here we've got just a Windows 10 machine being added to our new Emoji Corp domain, and it does work perfectly fine. You'll also see that this machine is called Finance with some emojis either side of it of a $sign. And lastly, just another place you can actually see the domain you're connected up to. The interesting thing here is on the left, we've got a black and white sort of version of the emojis, like black outline, and on the right, we've got the colorized version. It seems, or just based personally on what I've seen, it seems like as Microsoft's rewriting sort of GUI aspects of Windows, they're moving towards the newer version, but anything that's been around for a while tends to still use the older black outline. Not everything supports emojis, so Windows 7 just straight up has no clue what to do with it. You can still clearly actually add it to an emoji-based domain. It's just you can have a really bad time if you actually try to do anything because nothing's going to render. You're just going to get squares everywhere. While you're setting up a domain controller or creating a new domain that uses emojis, when you get to the NetBIOS stage, it'll pre-fill it with sort of a squashed version of what your selected forest name is. And in our case, that contains emojis. If you continue to click through it all, it's fine with it until you get to the very last step where it tries to verify things, and it'll throw up the error down the bottom saying you've used a non-approved character. Essentially, you have to use ASCII for your NetBIOS name for your Windows machine. And this last one's a bit of a late addition to the talk that I came up with just before I sort of came up here. Microsoft actually decided to create their own emojis that aren't part of the standard set. And if you decide to use them for your domain name, you'll get this error pop-up saying that the emojis you've selected don't match any, or will have a different meaning on another host, essentially. So introducing the non-standard emojis. On the left, we've got Ninja Cat and Stunt Cat. That's a screenshot of what they look like on my Windows machine. On the right, we've got just a text field where I've typed the same emojis in on my Windows machine, but I'm presenting on a Mac at the moment, so it has no clue what to do with them. Instead, printing a cat with a person and a cat with a bike, which I guess makes sense for Ninja Cat and Stunt Cat. Unfortunately, I found them a little bit too late to test them out and see what they actually would do with other security tools if we started testing things across platforms, but that could be an interesting thing for the future. So back to the Windows side. One of the first things I wanted to try when I started playing with emojis was making usernames and passwords that had emojis in them. Incidentally, I accidentally used Stunt Cat here and didn't actually realize it was a non-standard emoji at the time, but it worked perfectly fine for what I was doing. After creating your account, naturally you're going to want to log in. I went to type in the password and shit. You can't actually open the Windows emoji keyboard on the logon screen. You also can't do option 1 to copy and paste emojis, so we've made an account that can't actually be logged into from a physical keyboard. Those that are paying attention, though, might have noticed there is an emoji in the username, so how was that typed in if you can't type an emoji on the logon screen? Well, there's more than one way to log on to a machine. We can connect to it remotely via something like RDP. And if you're doing RDP or run as or anything else that's sort of happening from an already established session, you've got full access to the emoji keyboard and stuff like that. So we have made an account that can't be used from a physical machine. It can only be used via a remote connection. Not the most useful thing, but I guess it sort of counts as security and you could mess with someone a bit with it. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that RDP is not only open to you. It's open to pen testers and other people, depending on how well you've set up your network. And they can connect just as easily. Well, almost as easily. Here we've got a Kali box trying to connect to my domain controller. You'll see up the very top, we've got the diamond DC hazard signing in, and then the flame, but what the hell's the rest of it? Well, it turns out that the actual pictures for emojis aren't part of the standard. You've probably noticed this if you've seen like an iOS device or an Android device and compared the emojis. They do look slightly different. So the Unicode spec may say that, say, code 1234 is the flag for Australia, but that doesn't stop one platform from using the actual Australian flag picture, whilst another one uses the AU picture, or the AU sign. And absolutely none of that stops some idiot from using the flag codes to spell out their domain name. All of this is a really roundabout way of saying we are seeing the same emojis, but rendered completely different between platforms. So, despite all that, it does work perfectly fine. If an actor decided to type this in and hit connect, they would get the certificate details and then wonder what the hell they're looking at. But if, like any good person, they just click through the message, they will actually be able to connect. So despite looking completely different, they are functionally identical. Password complexity. So one of the best parts about using emojis in passwords is we've got a massively increased character set to pull from. ASCII gives us sort of less than 100 characters we can actually type on a standard keyboard, whereas as of September 2020, there's around 3,500 emojis available. So good luck cracking a password if someone picks some decently random emojis. Unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't agree. If we try and set a password on a standard domain using an emoji, we'll get a warning saying it's not complex enough. If we take a look in group policy and see what actually counts as complexity, we'll see we have to meet three of the following 4 categories: an uppercase, a lowercase letter, a number, and a special symbol. Well, we've got uppercase, we've got lowercase, we don't have a number, but I would have thought diamond is a special symbol, but all I can think from this message is it counts as A to Z for some reason. Anyway, we can get past it the old-fashioned way by adding a 1 to the end. All right. So we've got our super strong emoji-enhanced password now. Let's see if we can crack it. I will put a disclaimer out here. I'm not very good at password cracking, so first up, tried Hashcat using a word list that actually had the password in it, and it was no luck. Next, I gave John a try and still had no luck. I did mess around with this for about an hour and just got nowhere. I'm pretty sure it's at least possible with Hashcat, because cracking an emoji-based password is effectively the same as cracking a password that has any other non-English character in it that's based in Unicode. I just apparently aren't very good at this. But in all fairness, when's the last time any of the pen testers in the room actually mutated their password list with emojis? I'm going to speed things up a little bit now and start having a look at just how a few other tools handle emojis. Since we're talking red team tools, let's have a look at Nmap. Nmap will happily scan our domain controller that is full of emojis, and we'll just make absolutely no attempt at rendering any of the emojis, instead printing out the hex characters for the emoji values. I've decoded the top 3 of them down the bottom, just to sort of show what's coming out. Interestingly, and you're not going to be able to read it because it's so small up there, the top value is actually the NetBIOS name for the host that we scanned, which is Diamond DC hazard sign. And yet, previously when we were setting up a domain, we weren't allowed to use emojis in our NetBIOS domain, half of the domain. So for some reason, we're not allowed to do it on a Windows domain, but we are allowed to do it for hosts. So just a little bit weird. Not every part of Nmap works so gracefully. Parts of it do just have a bit of a freak out and just replace everything with an asterisk sign, but functionally it does work. How about Metasploit? So Metasploit handles things fairly well. There's a few rendering issues, like the one in the middle of the screen there. I have no idea what the hell that is, but it does work perfectly if you just hit enter to get past it. Printing out the system information works, but doesn't quite get the host name right. But if you print out a process listing, you might be able to see down the very bottom there is the user that is hacker with emojis either side of it. So all in all, Metasploit is fairly usable. Next up, we'll take a look at Wireshark. Like Nmap, Wireshark just won't attempt to render the emojis, instead, similar to Metasploit, printing out question marks. There's not a lot of interesting stuff you can do with Wireshark, like it was either going to crash or it's just going to display boring stuff. We did manage to generate a few malformed DNS packets. I'm assuming this is because we're using DNS on against a domain that has non-ASCII characters in it, and DNS is not really meant to do that. You're meant to do something like Punycode if you're going to do non-ASCII. So we'll talk a little bit more about Punycode in a second. But yeah, besides being able to break the filter a little bit, it doesn't really do much interesting. Next up, volatility. So for those that haven't looked at, don't know what volatility is, it's a memory forensics program written in Python. And as I'm sure anyone that's actually tried to write Python before, especially Python 3 for parsing binary strings back into strings, it can be an absolute bitch to deal with. And you'll be constantly getting error messages about like having a character that's not in the character set you're dealing with. So pretty high hopes that we were going to be able to crush volatility. Unfortunately, all that broke was my terminal. So you'll notice the H on the right-hand side is slightly sitting on top of the first emoji there. All I can think is that this terminal is using a fixed character width for everything, and the emojis are slightly larger. So nothing really broke. So far, everything's kind of handled emojis, and I sort of really wanted to actually break some stuff for this presentation. So let's sort of change that. So when you install Exchange, it defaults to using your domain name, which in our case is Emoji Corp written in flags. And as you can see, Exchange isn't real happy about that. If we check the error log for it, we can see that an exception was thrown saying that we've got an invalid fully qualified domain name. So yeah, straight up Exchange server does not work. So that's one major Microsoft service broken. How about IIS? So IIS, for those that don't know, is Microsoft's web server. It can be installed on any Windows server or workstation. And after it's installed, you can access your web server using your fully qualified domain name, which is, in our case, is the Emoji Corp one. Holy crap, that is small up there. All right, on the left-hand side, the weird bits that don't look like letters are emojis that are the black outline version for Internet Explorer, whereas Chrome has the colorized version. I did no research whatsoever into what actually causes that. All I can assume is that something's using a newer renderer or API or something. If we hit enter to trigger the actual navigation, first of all, it works. So we can actually navigate to a page based on emojis. But if you look at the address bar, all the emojis are gone now, instead replaced with ASCII characters. So what's actually happened? Well, the emojis have been translated into Punycode. And I mentioned that briefly in the Wireshark section, but Punycode itself could be an entire talk, so I'm going to be very high level here, but it's a way of converting essentially non-ASCII characters back into ASCII for being able to be used with things like DNS. So if you see anything that in a URL that begins with xn-, you're going to know that you're dealing with Punycode. So how about accessing a resource? So this time we've got our fully qualified domain name back in there, but on the right-hand side we're trying to access classes.htm. If we hit enter to go again, we get our puny code back and the page loads, but the glasses are actually still there. So it seems like the domain name part of a URL does not support emojis and will end up with puny code, whereas the resource name does support it and you're free to do whatever you want. So after seeing that IIS worked, I had pretty high hopes that SharePoint was going to work, given it all sits on top of IIS. The initial setup was promising. I had even happily connected to my database server that was Diamond DC hazard sign. However, once I started to log in, things went downhill. You can see up the top, we do still have our puny code URL, so we are connecting to it based on the emoji URL. However, the logon screen is less than happy with just a heap of question marks in it. If you try and log into this, it'll sit there thinking for a second and then just kick you straight back out to the logon screen. Having a look in the Windows error logs, we can see that it's effectively trying to resolve that name. I don't know if it's literally trying to resolve question.dc, but either way, I never managed to actually get it to work with emojis. As a side note, you'll notice the computer name down the bottom is printing with emojis, so Event Viewer does work with emojis, so that's nice. After playing around, I did manage to actually log into SharePoint, but if you look up the top, you'll see one key difference. I'm using an IP address instead of the URL, so the IP domain name. So it seems like it just doesn't work for some reason. So we're getting towards the end now, and I'm just going to try and show a heap of places that we can cram emojis just for the hell of it. So the whole idea of looking at emojis came, weirdly enough, from looking through some IIS logs, or a coworker looking through some IIS logs, and then just losing it laughing. And when I came over, I saw someone had run a network scan against this thing with the poop emoji as the user agent. So as the professionals we are, we decided to work out how to find poop emojis that were used for user agents. And we found, yeah, grep quite happily works with it. That sort of spawned the whole idea of going through this talk and seeing where else we could cram emojis so we can thank that random person that scanned something. If you want to do any form of coding involving emojis, we've got a couple of different options. If you want to be able to use emojis as like variable names and things, you're sort of limited to Java, JavaScript, and Swift. Might be a few others. If you want to be able to display emojis, then pretty much anything that supports Unicode will work fine. So here we've got some perfectly valid Swift code. So if you want to write the next iOS or macOS app, you are welcome to use that. Next, we've got some JavaScript, minified, of course, because all JavaScript should be minified and disgusting to read. This will work perfectly fine. And we've got a bit of a special one at the end. This is emoji code, which, as you can see, is a language by itself that everything, or all syntax, is just replaced with emojis. I've never written anything in this, but if anyone's writing a CTF out there, that could be an interesting challenge to give someone. On to macOS. So Mac has a built-in emoji keyboard, just like Windows. It's accessible through the edit menu in most applications, or was that command option space or something? I don't know my Mac shortcut keys. It works reasonably well, just same as Windows, click what you want and it types where your cursor is. It does have the same issue that we saw previously with volatility, that the quote of the over the snowflake is sort of rendered on top of it, so I guess it's fixed character width again. But yeah, functionally it is all there. Linux was a little less functiony, specifically Ubuntu in this case, because everything in Linux can be customized, but you can open the emoji keyboard by right-clicking in a text field and choosing Insert Emoji. That brings up the really tiny emoji keyboard on the right that can't be expanded, and half the time when I clicked an emoji I got a different one, so it wasn't real good to use. You also can't open it from a terminal, so to type in a terminal you have to type into a random text field, then copy and paste it out of there back into the terminal. But once you've got them working, it does print them out perfectly fine. If you get sick of crappy Wi-Fi puns for your home SSID, you can use emojis in it. One thing to keep in mind, I did actually have something like this for a while for my IoT crap, and I got an IP camera that had to connect via holding a QR code of your username, SID and password in front of it, and it just refused to connect to it. So depending on what you're doing, it may break some things. And last but not least, if you're a diehard emoji user, you can buy a full emoji keyboard. Using this likely won't get around the issue that I had previously with typing in Windows passwords, as it does require some special software to run, which likely won't be running prior to you logging in. That's what I got for you. You got any questions?
Thanks, Adrian. That was great. I have to admit, your talk title was a tester of a lot of things we use for BSides, like our CRM and our website.
I was very happy to see it worked in the brochure, and was very disappointed the badge didn't display talk details. I wanted to see someone render that.
Yeah. We didn't quite get the schedule into the badge this year, but that would have been a good test as well. So we have a few questions. AJD has asked, are there any emojis which have multiple possible byte sequence encodings, and could there be potential bugs around this?
I definitely did not go deep enough for that. I will say that, in theory, if they're part of the standard, it should be no. If you're doing weird shit like the Microsoft custom ones, maybe. But maybe there can be an advanced one of this for 2022.
Did you report any of the bugs you found with the emojis?
They are not bugs, they're features. Just because you crash something does not make it a bug. I think a lot of it is just, it's not designed to work with Unicode, essentially. A lot of the things that did break are either just weird rendering issues, or it's generally things to do with domain names that are just not supposed to work with Unicode. So maybe they'll change it one day. Maybe they'll open DNS up to be full Unicode supported, because they'll get sick of having every URL that contains emojis in Unicode looking like a malicious URL, but we'll see what happens with that.
Alex Mason has asked, any idea how the right to left markers, etc., would affect things?
No, and I had not even considered that till someone brought it up at the speaker dinner last night, and yeah, I think it would very much just depend on each individual application. I don't know what happens if you mix left to right and right to left, if it just has a freak out and collides in the middle or what. Most of the things probably wouldn't change too much though. The rendering issues could be a bit more interesting, but the DNS issues likely would just crash the same way.
Boba T has asked, did you discover any working emoji exploits or vulns, example XSS?
I definitely didn't get anything like that. It would be very cool to be able to just throw a poop emoji and get a shell out of it, but I considered building a web shell or something that used emojis, at least just to show some form of actual attacking using it, but unfortunately the 20-minute time slot turned out to be a bit too constrained for that.
So Mainframe McGee has asked, would something written in emoji code be more or less secure than other common languages?
That depends. Everyone can hack every program you make. Do you think some dude that made a random programming language is going to do any better? It's probably going to be the same as any other custom language that if you actually look at it, you'll probably find something, but I have no idea what's under the hood of it. I literally just saw it and thought that looks like a cool thing to throw in.
So GT has asked, for the physical machine logon to Windows, is it possible to use alt codes to enter Unicode characters?
Not as far as I could find. I couldn't find anything that would allow you to... essentially, it seems like when you've got that specific text field open, selected, none of the special things you could normally do on a keyboard work. Can't copy, you can't paste. I never got anywhere with alt codes or anything.
I think I've covered off all of them. I may have missed some. Let me just check. Yep. One last one from Dan. Would an AD password containing emojis work for domain-joined Nix box?
Ooh, I have no idea. I mean, it definitely works on the Windows side, so if it doesn't work on Linux, it's open source, so fix it yourself. But it should. Because the main thing here is there's nothing special about it being an emoji. In theory, if your password could contain any non-English character, it should be functionally the same as it being an emoji. So I would think it should work. There should be a big enough, international base of users that someone's going to have tried to type in a Chinese character or something into their password. So yeah, I don't know, but there's pretty good odds that it would work.
Awesome, and that's all. Can we give another big round of applause to Adrian? Thank you.